Hi everyone, Miss Gooch here, and this is a video all about the poem My Last Duchess by Robert Browning. And this poem was written by Robert Browning in 1842, inspired by someone called the Duke of Ferrara, whose first wife died in 1561 of suspected poisoning. It turned out it wasn't poisoning, but there were lots of rumours flying around, and they'd only been married for 3 years when she passed away. And the poem explores the patriarchal society. So a patriarchal society is a society where men are the most powerful, have the control, and basically dominate everything: politics, religion, social situations. The men are in control. And it also explores what was known as the marriage market, where women were traded like properties. So within this patriarchal society, women were, when they were born, they were properties of their fathers, and then as they got to marriageable age, they became property of their husband. They literally had next to no rights of their own. So different times. And in the poem, the Duke is talking to someone who's employed by a count. So a count is just another version of a duke, someone with a high status. And now, because his last wife has passed away, he now has his eyes on the daughter of the count. And in this poem, it's the whole story. He shows this portrait of his wife, and he's telling the employee the story of what's happened to her. So before we read the poem, let's have a think about how it links to power and conflict. Well, the poem explores the power of the nobility / the ruling classes, so the dukes, the lords, the counts, all those things where names and status are passed down through families over years. It shows how much power they have. But it also presents the duke in the poem, and men in general, as quite weak, and we'll explore that idea in a bit more detail after we've read the poem. So let's read it through together. It's quite a long one, so just follow along as best you can, and we'll talk about it after. That's my last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder now, for our Pandulph's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Will't please you sit and look at her? I said for our Pandulph by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance. But to myself they turned, since none put by the curtain I have drawn for you but I, and seemed as they would ask me, if they durst, how such a glance came there so. There, so, not the first are you to turn and ask thus. Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. Perhaps Fra Pandulph chanced to say, her mantle laps over the lady's wrists too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half flush that dies along her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, 'twas all one. My favour at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode in round the terrace. All and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. She thanked men, good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900-year-old name with anybody's gift. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? Even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such a one, and say, just this in that, or you disgusts me, here you miss or there exceed the mark. And if she let herself be less than so, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, even then would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whenever I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. There she stands as if alive. Will't please you rise? We'll meet the company below then. I repeat, the Count your master's known munificence is ample warrant that no just pretence of mine for dowry will be disallowed, though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. Nay, we'll go together down, sir. Notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which claws of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. So quite a long one, but let's break this down together so we make sure we know what's happening at each point. So it opens the poem by pointing out the Duchess that's painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. So right from the outset, we know that she's no longer alive. We don't know how, we don't know why, and we don't know the Duke's feelings about it yet, but that is the opening. And this, the Duke is very quick to drop the painter's name in, Fra Pandolf, and you'll see again, Fra Pandolf. So this is him name dropping, obviously a famous painter, to show how wealthy and to try and impress the person he's talking to. He's basically showing off. And he reveals that he keeps the painting behind a curtain. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail a bit later. But straight away we get this feeling of the Duke trying to control who sees her. And what he's basically saying here as well is that people seem to ask, they always ask him about the look on her face. Now, the look on her face he calls a spot of joy. So basically, she's blushing. And, you know, obviously it's not like a picture taken on a camera. This is a painting. So she didn't even have control over what was being painted of her. But still, the Duke finds this unacceptable, and he goes on to explain why. So here he says, perhaps Fra Pandolf said. So this really shows you that he is quite paranoid. So he's making up what might have been said from the painter to his wife that made her blush, obviously because he's very, very jealous. And he's saying that she thought this sort of stuff was courtesy, so she just thought people were being nice. But he doesn't think that way. So he thinks that she is being like too innocent and too easily impressed, he says. She had a heart too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere, is basically what he's saying. So she's too quick to show people, you know, love and care and whatever else. And you know, look at what he says here, the spot of joy. He can't bear it that she's happy, that things make her happy. And these are the things that he says make her happy. My favourite, her breast. So his favourite, he's saying that he makes her happy. But also the sunset makes her happy, the dropping of the daylight. Cherries make her happy. And the white horse that she rides make her happy. So these aren't big affairs that she's having, these are small things, and he can't bear it that things that aren't him make her happy. And he says that here, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech or blush. So basically he doesn't like it that he doesn't get a special smile, a special reaction from her. But if we think about how this marriage probably happened, she was probably very young. She was probably had probably never met the Duke before the marriage started. This would have been an arranged marriage between her father and the Duke, like this situation now. So it's no wonder that she felt a little bit shy, maybe unable to sort of talk to the Duke. So it's all just, you know, he's putting it all on her, not really thinking about the rest of the situation. And this is what he says. She thanked men as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. So a 900 years old name is that being a duke, whatever his name was, being passed on through 900 years of family, and he thought that's amazing, and she should be really grateful for that and not treat everybody the same as him. He should be special. And he goes on to say, even had you skill in speech, which I have not. So he admits here that he can't communicate with his wife. And he says, even if I did say these things to her and she let herself be lessoned, so she listened to me, even then that would be some stooping. And I choose never to stoop. To stoop is to lower yourself. So he believes that communicating his feelings is lowering himself and making himself less of a man. So think about that patriarchal society where men are in control. It's not necessarily just bad for women, it's bad for men as well, because they can't express themselves properly. So what does he do? Well, he gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. So this is the suggestion there of the murder. And then he moves on very quickly. Up you get, off we go. So let's go down and look, on to the next one. Let's go down and talk about my next wife, the object that we've been talking about here. His fair daughter self is my object. Women as possessions there shown once again. And this final image, we'll talk about this in a bit more detail in a moment, but he says, notice Neptune, that's the god of the sea, taming a seahorse. So if you look over here, that's Neptune there, and he's riding the seahorse. And we'll have a think about what this shows about power in just a moment. So let's go back to those central arguments. Hopefully you've seen how the poem explores the power of the nobility and the ruling classes, but also in a way how the poem presents the Duke as weak. And let's have a look at firstly the power of the nobility in a bit more detail. So this opening line, that's my last Duchess painted on the wall. So the my shows possession, linking to that patriarchal society, and the last suggests that there will be more of them, or there has been a few of them, and it just shows how easy it is for him to stay in control, how easy it is for him to get away with what he's doing because of the society he lives in. And also thinking about painted on the wall, it makes it seem like she's painted directly on the wall, so she can never leave or be sold. She's not like on a canvas in a portrait. And again, that highlights the Duke's controlling nature. And then, of course, we have to talk about this part. This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. Look how simple that statement is. I gave commands. I didn't do it myself. I just told someone to do it. And it shows you just how easy it was for the Duke to have the Duchess killed without any sort of follow-up, without any sort of suspicion. And it just shows that he has total power and control with absolutely no consequences. And then I want us just to think about this little full stop here. So this is actually in the middle of a line. So that's called caesura, when you have punctuation breaking up a line. And we could say that reflects the end of her life. So in the middle of the line could show where it stopped too early. It shows at any point the Duke could have just ended her life and without a second thought. But let's start to think about how the Duke might be seen as weak. So I want to have a think about this. Since none puts by the curtain, I have drawn for you but I. So there's two interpretations really here. Interpretation one is that he now has complete control over her, and whoever, he can make sure that nobody looks at her unless he grants them permission. But the second reading of it could show that now he can't stand to look at her because she reminds him of what he did and is now missing, or even that she reminds him of his weaknesses. Remember how he said he couldn't communicate properly and that he couldn't get control of her. So maybe looking at her reminds him that he's not as powerful as he thought or he thinks he is. And let's look at this one. So even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear. So we've already kind of covered this, the Duke admitting he lacks the skills of communication, and that's him revealing a weakness. Perhaps he was just jealous of how easily the Duchess communicated with people. People in his household who would have been there for his whole life. She comes in and instantly makes friends with them all, whereas he's probably never talked to them before or properly had a conversation with them. So that might be an element of it, his jealousy of her. And he says here he was never able to make his will clear to her. So his will would be like what he wants. And maybe, as I said, that's an example of the impact of patriarchal society. Men are unable to express themselves and what they really want and their true emotions. And then I just want to think about this final image, and I'm going to give us two interpretations here to take away. So the first one is that the Duke is Neptune, the god of the sea, and he has total control over the women in his life. He's tamed his wife by killing her. She's the seahorse in this situation. But the second interpretation is quite interesting. Maybe the Duchess is Neptune because she now has control over the Duke's thoughts, and she's still able to make him angry even after her death. He's the one there obsessing over her. He's the one retelling his story over and over again, hiding her behind the curtain. So you could argue that Neptune is actually the Duchess. And just to wrap up thinking about structure, this poem is written as a dramatic monologue, and a dramatic monologue is a poem in the form of speech delivered by one character only. And it reveals to us how self-obsessed the Duke is and emphasises how controlling he is because he doesn't allow anyone else to speak. So he's talking in this poem to a visitor, and if you notice at the beginning he says, "Sit down." So straight away he lowers the guest, and so he's higher status. And then at the end he's like, "Now stand up." So he's very bossy and controlling anyway, and he doesn't let his visitor speak at all. And I also want us to have a think about the rhyming couplets and this iambic pentameter. So each pair of lines in the poem they rhyme, and they have also, every line has 10 syllables. That's what iambic pentameter means. So when you might have noticed when I was reading it, it felt quite conversational, almost like quite chatty, but underneath it all, it was actually very carefully controlled. The whole thing is very, very highly structured, and that emphasises the Duke's controlling nature. Alright, so over to you now, time to test your knowledge. I want you to pick one of the essay questions below and answer it using the quotations explored in the video. So, first one, how does Browning present the Duke as powerful? How does Browning present the Duke as weak? And, there should be a question mark there. The shine question, to what extent is Browning criticising the patriarchal society? So pick one of those, have a go at answering it, send it to your teacher, and then tune in for the next video.